Ben from Gwinear Angling here. Autumn's a great time of year for sea fishing in Cornwall, particularly bottom fishing for larger species like bass and small-eyed ray, that sort of thing. It can be very daunting though if you're a relative newcomer to this. You've got your rod, your reel and your tripod, but you might be a little bit confused as to what goes on the end. Obviously the most important thing is your bait, and we'll get to that in time, but probably the second most important thing is your rig. So with a view to that, we're going to go over a couple of our favourite rigs for bottom fishing at this normally very productive time of year. Okay, so the first rig I'm going to show you is the classic running ledger. For demonstration purposes, I'm using this orange Drennan grease weasel shock leader. Normally I'd favour something clear, but just so you can see it on the camera better, this is what we're using today. What else you'll need? Some snap swivels, some large swivels. These are Gemini 100-pound power swivels, a hook of your choice, and some 8mm beads. So I've got a length of line here, and we're going to assume that this is your shock leader coming from your reel. The first thing you want to do is put a bead on. So that's on there. Next thing we're going to do is put one of these snap swivels on, and this is where your lead connects onto. So that goes on the line. Add another bead, and you can see here we've got our snap swivel trapped between two beads. That's going to be where our lead goes on. The next thing to do is to finish it off with a swivel at the end. So we'll tie that swivel onto the end of the leader. I'm just going to use a 4-turn Gwinear knot here. Moisten the knot, pull it tight, and there you go. Trim off your tag end. I never trim my tag ends down right snug. I usually leave a little bit there just in case the knot slips a little. It shouldn't do, but it's better to be safe than sorry. So for our hook length, generally with a running ledger you'd use something around 3 foot as a basic starting point. I might even go up to quite a long trace at sometimes, depending on how much surf there is to deal with, that sort of thing. With a fish like bass, they don't particularly like to feel any resistance, so the longer the trace that you can get away with, quite often the more positive your bites will be and the more hookups you'll get. So I'm just going to cut off about 3 foot of this. We'll tie that to our swivel on the end. Again, 4-turn Gwinear knot. Wet it, pull it down. Trim off the tag. You can see that what we've got there, the snap swivel trapped between two beads, swivel at the end, and our hook length coming off that swivel. We can then attach our hook. This is a 3/0 Sakuma Manta Extra, pretty sort of standard hook for beach fishing for larger fish in these parts. We'll talk a bit more about different models of hook later. Again, hook goes on the end. And that is the completed rig. A rig that has caught countless specimen fish for countless anglers. A classic, and rightfully so. A couple of variations that we can show you on this. The first variation that I like to use is to attach a swivel to the end of this piece. So whereas before it might have been a shock leader, now we're looking at it as like, this is a rig body. This is a piece of rig body that your lead can run on. When you put a swivel at the end of this, you effectively turn it into sort of a semi-bolt rig. So the fish has about however much you want to leave here, 3 or 4 foot is probably a good starting point. And before it jams up against the knot, feels the full weight of the lead, and hopefully adds a little bit more hooking potential. So just add a swivel at the end of this. Pull it tight, trim, and that's another variation there. hook caught on the bench. Come on, out you come. There it comes. There you can see. This is acting like a rig body, and that's the hook length on its own. Another variation we can do is turn the hooking arrangement into a pennel hooking arrangement. This gives far greater hooking potential, and it also aids with bait presentation too. If you're using a single hook with baits like worm and things like that, they can become bunched up around the bottom of the hook. With this, you're putting an extra hook in, so it kind of keeps the bait straighter out, and it also adds another point where the fish can be hooked. Usually when adding a pennel hook, I go in through the top of the eye like that. Add the bottom hook as usual. And that is a pennel running ledger. What you want to do, put your bait on this hook, leave this hook free for the time being, and then when you've finished applying your bait with your elastic or whatever you want to do, you can wind this over the line a few times, nick it in the top of your bait, and that will stay there. And it'll keep your bait nice and straight at another point where the fish can be hooked. And it's pretty much a standard rig for a lot of bigger fish anglers around here. You'll find that most of the anglers you encounter will be using some sort of hooking arrangement like this. It might not be the same hooks top and bottom, but they will mostly be using a pennel hook. You can also fix this in place with a knot. That's a more advanced technique. It has its pros and its cons. We might look at that another time. But there you go. Running ledger rig. Simple, classic. So before we go on to the next rig design, you might be thinking to yourself, well, the running ledger rig looks great. Why would I ever need to look beyond that? It is a great rig design, but it does have a couple of drawbacks. First, your bait is flapping around in the cast, which limits your casting potential. Rigs with the bait clipped in tight behind the lead are much more aerodynamic in this respect. Secondly, it can be quite tangle prone, especially in a lumpier sea, or if there's a lot of weed in the sea, you'll find yourself having to untangle this rig quite a bit. So we're going to look at another rig design now that improves significantly in both these areas, the classic clip down pulley rig. Okay, so before we get into the clip down pulley rig, perhaps we should talk a little bit about the origin of the term clip down. What does it mean? Well, essentially it refers to any sort of device like this is an imp. This tethers your baited hook to your trace line, your rig body, and so it sits in tight behind the lead until it hits the water, then the baited hook is released and everything sinks to the bottom. The advantage of this is it gives you much greater casting potential. These things have revolutionised beach casting since they've been around. It's been around for quite a long time now. It's enabled anglers to reach much greater distances with baits than they ever could before. Another advantage of it is it ensures your bait presentation is much better than it would be if your bait was just flapping around at the mercy of the wind as you hammered it out towards the distance. It keeps your bait in much better condition. So it has quite a few good advantages, no real disadvantages really. So it's something that I would attach to any sort of paternoster rig. Even if I didn't intend to use it that much, it's nice just to have the option sitting there at the bottom of your rig in case you would do want a longer cast and still maintain good presentation. So the actual materials for the clip down pulley rig, not that dissimilar to the running ledger really. The only difference is that we're using a pulley bead now, and we're not using the snap link anymore. We are using the bait clip. The lead goes on the bait clip. So let's start out. So this is going to be our rig body. The first thing I do is I attach the imp to the bottom of the rig body, and make sure you tie it onto the right end of the imp. The bit you want to tie it onto has the little kicking bit of metal sticking out there, so that's a good little sign that you've got the right end. So that's tied on. Nip it off. That's our rig body. That's the imp at the end. Now we're going to slide on a pulley bead. When constructing a pulley rig using a pulley bead, a lot of anglers would choose to put a bead either side of the main pulley bead itself. This helps protect the knots a little better and helps the hook length stand off from the rig body. It's not strictly necessary though, so for the sake of simplicity, I've omitted this step from this demonstration. That just goes on like that. This attaches to the end of your shock leader. Next thing we do, we put on a strong swivel. You want a strong swivel for a pulley rig because chances are you'll be using it for power casting. Don't use your teeth. I do, but you shouldn't. So there's our rig body. We've got the imp on the end, we've got the pulley bead sliding on the rig body itself, and we've got the swivel. The next thing we do is we attach the hook length to the end, to that swivel there. Important thing to remember is you want your hook length to be shorter than your rig body. It doesn't have to be much shorter. Generally I look at it as a 4:3 ratio. If my rig body is 4 foot long, my trace is going to be 3 foot long. The reason for that is it needs to be shorter to clip onto the imp. There we go. So I want my hook length to be about there-ish. Cut that off. Again, with your choice of hooks, I'm just going to show you a pennel because that, in practice, most people are using this rig with a pennel hook arrangement. So again, I'll go in through the top of the eye. That's our second hook. Most anglers you see using this rig will be using the pennel arrangement. They might not be using the same hook for the top and the bottom. That's something that you can change when you become more experienced, but for demonstration purposes, 2 hooks of the same pattern will serve. And there it is. So what happens is your lead goes on the end of the imp like that. Let's assume you've got your bait on your trace and you've got your pennel hook all sorted out. That will then clip into the imp like that. Your shock leader is attached to the pulley bead. So the rig will look like that with the lead on the bottom, all nice and straight and streamlined. When that hits the water, it'll pop the hook out and your rig will lie nicely on the bottom. Another good advantage of this, it's a really good rig for rough ground fishing as well, if you're fishing over hard ground, because when a fish takes your bait, the lead slides up the line, and it actually, when you retrieve the fish, it's much like having a running ledger. Your lead is above the fish, so it keeps the lead off the bottom, hopefully. So it's very popular for rough ground fishing. Has a multitude of uses. A lot of people just use this as a standard fishing arrangement, especially for larger species. It really does suit those bigger fish. It's a classic rig. It's caught a lot of big fish, so use with confidence. Another very popular way to make a pulley rig is to trap a swivel between 2 beads like this. Just be aware that if you choose this variation, your line will come under some abuse from that swivel because it's quite a narrow, sharp edge, and you'll need to check your line a lot for kinks and that. A pulley bead is a little bit better in that respect, and it limits the number of components to 1, so that's why I've demonstrated it first. But this is another very popular form. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly demonstrate how to put the lead on the imp because it can be a little bit fiddly. There's a little offshoot of metal on the side of the imp here, and that goes through the eye of the lead and it clips on like that. It's also important to remember that the hook length in a pulley rig takes some of the strain when casting. So it's important to use an appropriately robust hook length and appropriate diameter and breaking strain. So if you've got a 5-ounce lead, like this one is approximately 5 ounce, 150 gram, you want to be looking at a minimum of 25 pound breaking strain. Ideally a little bit more than that. So if you go up to 6 ounce, you want to be looking at least 30, or ideally a little bit more. So bear that in mind when choosing your hook length. All right, so now we're familiar with the basic structures of the rigs. Let's talk about how changing the little elements like hooks and the line that you're choosing, what difference does that make to the overall rig presentation? So if you come into the shop for the first time, you're likely to be bewildered by the amount of line and the hooks and things like that we stock. But it's important to remember that everything has its own place, and with time and experience you'll learn that. Hopefully we can shorten that learning curve a little bit now. If you're using a rig like, say, the Pulley Pennell rig or the running ledger rig with the lead running on its own piece of line, you're going to want something pretty sturdy for that piece of line. Like a standard choice for a Pulley Pennell rig would be something like 80-pound rig body. That's going to be stiff, it's going to be tough, and it's going to resist the swivel, the pulley bead running up and down it all the time. Same as a running ledger rig. Although if you're fishing for smaller species with smaller leads, you can step that down a little bit. Say if you're fishing for a flounder with a 3-ounce lead, you could drop that down to 30 or 40 pound with no issues at all. That will be strong enough to resist the lead sliding up and down, no problem. For your hook length, you're going to want to think a little bit harder about that. You want to match the hook length to the situation that you're facing. If you've got quite a heavy surf there, you're going to want a stiffer material. If you've got fairly calm water, you can get away with something a little bit softer and your presentation is going to be improved. As a general sort of catch-all sort of thing, a lot of people use Sunset Amnesia. This has been on the market for God knows how long. It's a very old line, but it stood the test of time. It's stiff. You can pull any sort of kinks out of it very easily. It's quite coarse for its stated breaking strain, but it's very reliable. You know what you're getting with this. You know it's not going to fail on you unexpectedly. It's a really good line, and like I said, it stood the test of time. It's caught a lot of big fish, this stuff. Problem with that is it's a little bit stiff, so if you wanted something a little bit softer, you could go for something like this. This is Asso Ultraflex. This is a more modern material. It's definitely a little bit more supple, even in the higher breaking strains. Like you could use like a 50 or 60 pound of this, and it's still going to be quite soft and limp. And that's the advantage with something like this more modern material. It improves presentation, but the strength is still there. So although it might not be as tangle resistant as something like Amnesia, it really has its time and its place. I really like this sort of stuff. Another choice you might have is if you're fishing over rough ground and you're expecting to lose quite a lot of hook length and gear, you might choose something like this. This is Asso Classic, comes on bulk spools. It's just relatively inexpensive, and it's a line that you won't feel too bad about getting through quite a bit in a session. It's still very good, very reliable. It's like a classic monofilament, so this is another one that won't fail on you unexpectedly. Very reliable. If you want something that's thin but still maintains that stiffness, then fluorocarbon is going to be your boy. This is virtually invisible in water. It does cost a little bit more than monofilament of the same amount, but the benefits are worth it when you've got spooky fish or you want to use fine material but keep the stiffness. Fluorocarbon is really good for that. It's also a bit heavier than monofilament, so it tends to pin things down a little bit more. Really great material. Moving on to hooks now, and as a general rule, you want to match the hook to the bait you're using and the species that you're targeting. So if you're using something like the Pulley Pennell rig and you're fishing for ray over a beach, something like that, you're probably going to want to be choosing something like this. This is a Cox & Rule Surf and Uptide Extra hook. It's a wide gate pattern made out of strong wire. Lots of other companies make very similar hooks. There's a lot of choice in this sort of this design. And what this is made for is big fish, big baits. You can put a lot of pressure on and the hook's not going to bend. It's really going to be very reliable for you. And with something like a ray, it's going to hook up nicely every time and survive unhooking some of those more difficult hook holds really well. You're going to probably be using the same hook for all your session. They're really great hooks for that sort of thing. If you're fishing for something like a bass, something that has a bonier mouth, cod, those sort of hooks are still great, but to improve things even more, you can step down your gauge of wire a little bit and you'll get better penetration with that. Something like this. This is a Varavas Big Mouth standard hook. This is made out of finer wire, so it's actually quite a bit sharper. It will penetrate a lot more easily into a bony mouth. And although it's you can bend it with your hands, if you're careful, if you have something like a bass or a cod off the beach and you have ample time and no snags to play them around, you won't have any problems with something like this. I've landed double figure fish with ease on these sort of hooks, so they are man enough, and of course you will hook a few more fish with these, so they definitely have their own advantages. Don't overlook these and just go straight to these, because both patterns have their uses. Another hook you might want to look at is something like this. This is a classic, a Kamazan B940 Aberdeen. This is a long shank pattern. It's really, it's something that I'd choose if I was fishing with worm baits, maybe like smaller fish baits, even like half a sand eel or something like that. If you're fishing for smaller species like whiting, flatfish, targeting dogfish, gurnards, that sort of thing, this hook really comes into its own. It's very sharp, very reliable. Again, you can bend it, but it will manage those slightly bigger bonus fish that you might get. This is a really classic hook, and it's been around for ages, and it's caught a lot of fish for people. Again, there's a lot of choice on the market with this style of hook. Aberdeen pattern is made by literally every hook manufacturer that makes sea hooks, so you have all the choice in the world when it comes to these. Some are stronger than others, but this is kind of one of the classic ones, the Camazan B940 Black Aberdeen. Another hook that's very popular these days is if you're targeting something like gilthead bream, maybe wrasse, something that you want a fairly small hook for, but you want real strength there, real power in the wire. This is a really good choice. This is a Cox & Rule Chinook hook. Again, lots of manufacturers make these. There's a really wide choice out there. Different people favour different patterns. They're all a little bit different, but the basic component stays the same. It's strong wire, but still small. So with your gilt heads, they're not going to be able to bite through the wire or bend the hook out with their teeth. With wrasse, you're going to be able to bully them away from those snags without the hook bending on you. So these are a really great choice for things like that. But hooks are really down to personal choice at the end of the day. You'll probably find yourself favouring different variations, different manufacturers over time, and as you sort of gain confidence with each one. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, why don't you check out some of the other videos on our channel. If you'd like to support the channel, please give the videos a like and hit the subscribe button. It really helps us out. If you want to add any comments or if you've got any questions or anything like that, just put them down below. One of us will get round to answering it as soon as we can. If you're in the Newquay area and looking to do some fishing, come and see us in the shop. It's the #1 shop in the area for fresh bait, quality tackle and sound local advice. We'll always do our best to put you on the fish. Cheers.